Like to welcome everybody who's joining us right now. Uh, and we will take another just minute or so to allow additional people to come in. Um, Today's presentation will be by Nate Harold, who is a physical scientist with NOAA, and he will be talking about high-resolution coastal land cover data for the nation. And we're just going to wait another minute or so for people to come in. Welcome to today's presentation. We will be starting in just another couple of minutes. People are still coming into the site. All right. We are going to get started with a little bit of our material before this starts. I'm Norm Levine from the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. I will be your moderator today as we move through today's program. And if you have not heard yet, EURISA is in the midst of a name change. It is becoming officially the Geospatial Professional Network. And please keep that in mind as we are moving forward. This change reflects the nature of the group more directly, and we are very excited as this moves forward. We have a number of programs that are going to be up and coming through the GPN. In January, we will have a virtual conference, Location, Enterprise Addressing, and Public Safety, the LEAP conference, January 28th to 30th. We will have a webinar on understanding social risk and community resilience. It will be virtually hosted in February. The date will be announced. And the 28th GIS Valuation Technologies Conference will be March 3rd through 6th in Columbus, Ohio. Additionally, the GIS Leadership Academy will be held June 16th to 20th, 2025 in Chicago, Illinois, and again, December 8th through 12th, 2025 in Savannah, Georgia. The Advanced Leadership Academy will be November 3rd to 7th, 2025 in New Orleans. The GIS Pro Conference this year will be in the Rockies. It'll be in Denver, October 6th through 9th of 2025. And we're all looking forward to seeing people there. So please remember, if you are not a member of EURISA or the GPN, you can do so by following the link or the QR code at the bottom. It's a great way to get connected and stay connected with professionals in the field. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Nate Harold. Nate is a physical scientist and the program manager for the Coastal Analysis Program at NOAA's Office of Coastal Management. He oversees the creation and maintenance of land cover and land change data for coastal regions of the United States. His work involves satellite imagery, LiDAR, and other geospatial technologies that track and analyze land use changes, which are critical for understanding environmental trends, natural hazard impacts, and the effects of climate change. In January of 2024, NOAA released its first phase of a new high-resolution 1-meter CCAP land cover data, and this presentation will review these products. Nate has been with NOAA for over 2 decades, contributing to the development of geospatial data and tools for coastal resilience planning. He is a key contributor to NOAA's Digital Coast Initiative, which provides accessible resources for coastal managers and stakeholders to address the challenges such as sea level rise and habitat conservation. We're now going to switch over, and Nate, you may take over the screen.
Thanks, Norm. I go ahead and share my screen and get our presentation started. Thank you all for showing up and attending the presentation, and thank you to GPN for having me. As Norm mentioned, I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the high-resolution land cover mapping work that NOAA is doing under the Coastal Change Analysis Program. Hopefully, folks on the phone call have heard of CCAP in the past and are maybe familiar with our work. If not, I can give you a little bit of background. NOAA, CCAP is NOAA's authoritative source for land cover data within the U.S. We've been producing these products for a number of decades, since the mid-90s. We've worked nationally to get CCAP recognized as a national geospatial data asset by the FGDC. And we've worked all along that time frame with USGS and all the other federal agencies that do similar types of land cover mapping at a national scale. Now, for most of our history, the mapping that we have done has been focused on the production of 30-meter resolution land cover products, those derived from Landsat imagery, and then updating and keeping track of the changes that are occurring on those landscapes by updating those products every 5 years. Though, more recently, NOAA has been really focused on taking steps to make a transition away from those 30-meter products and towards higher resolution products derived from high resolution aerial and satellite imagery. And really what we're working towards right now is the build out of a 1-meter replacement product line for CCAP, something that we can utilize to both keep those products up to date in the future, but also support some of the applications that we know folks have need and that 30-meter data can't support. Now, for us, this is not something new, but historically, these products have been pretty expensive for us to produce. But with the advent of increased processing power, more advanced AI classifiers, and a wealth of free and low-cost imagery, LiDAR, and other ancillary data being available, we really have seen a change from those products being almost cost prohibitive to faster, cheaper, better production now being possible. And one of the key points that I'd like to make, and if you walk away with nothing else from this presentation, this would be one of the pieces I'd like you to remember. When I say faster, I don't mean fast. When I say cheaper, I don't mean cheap. And when I say better, I don't mean perfect, right? These tools have been a great advantage to us in making this transition, but AI and that improved technology is really not a magic click of the button, at least not yet. And we put a lot of work in taking the outputs from those products and turning them into a final data set that's fit for the uses that we hope you all will make of them. Right now, our goal is to build out a 2020, 2021 era of that product, and then start to update those data sets every 4 to 6 years over the next 2 years, so that we can start that monitoring cycle, much like what we've had with Landsat in the past. And in that context, Landsat becomes for us a historic change or trend data set, and these high resolution products provide our way forward in the future. And we will have both a 2021 date for the 30 meter and for the high resolution product lines to help to facilitate that transition between those two resolutions. Now, one of the things that I like to explain to folks who say that they don't really need a higher resolution data set, if you can imagine some of those folks being out there, is that the high resolution data that we're now producing can support all of the many, many applications that our standard 30 meter product line ever did. But it can do so with the added advantage of being also able to support those same regional type applications with a greater level of precision and accuracy. Along with that, as I've already kind of hinted at, these data can support more detailed types of applications, more detailed impervious data and urban area mapping that can be used to support better hydrodynamic modeling, better flood risk assessment, improved stormwater management, and can be really used to address the issues surrounding urban forestry, urban heat, and tree equity. Similar in the natural side, the more detailed mapping of natural areas such as some of the wetlands that you can see here can better support detailed green infrastructure analysis, improved conservation and restoration site planning, more detailed habitat assessment, and more accurate carbon accounting. This can help us to assess the impacts from climate change into the future. And as we've seen in the past, many of the changes that you'd expect to see in a salt marsh environment like this one in the state of Maine, the changes that you would expect to see here typically occur at a scale smaller than what a 30 meter resolution satellite like Landsat could see. And so it isn't until after you've already reached some level of tipping point and those changes become visible in those coarser resolution satellite image data sets that you'd start to pick them up in the maps. And by then, it's really not a surprise to anyone. So Norm and I both mentioned that we've already released some data. This is really the first foray that we've taken in churning out data sets at that national level. Most of the products that NOAA has produced in the past have been on a much smaller scale, either out in the Pacific, the Caribbean, or in very project-based geographies around the rest of the US. Our first set of products, which we consider our short-term focus or goal, was set on extracting impervious surfaces, woody vegetation, both trees and shrubs, as well as water feature mapping. And as we mentioned, these data sets were released back in January of this year. And that was in big part thanks to some of the BIL, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and some of our great partners that helped us share the cost of those those products being developed. You can see the website for those data sets right here. And hopefully you'll find those products useful. I'm going to go through here in a couple of slides some examples of what that data looks like. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to build upon this foundation into a full CCAP scheme product, something more typical or that you might have expected if you're familiar with our 30 meter data sets. And really what I can say is that we focused on this subset of categories as our initial step because they can be so well derived from some of the AI classification techniques that are out there, and because no matter what our workflow has been in the past, these three data sets become kind of our first step and the foundation for all of the work that we do in our CCAP mapping. So what does that data look like? This is a natural color image of an area outside of Detroit in Michigan. And here's what some of that impervious cover mapping that we've been developing in partnership with a company called Ecopia, who's based in Toronto, Canada. This is what that product looks like. Here's some of the specs that's associated with the mapping that Ecopia is doing for us and that you can expect in those data sets. And this has been a big improvement for us over some of our past methodologies. The deep learning ensemble of AI that Ecopia is using has been a pretty significant improvement over some of the object-based and machine learning classifications that we've done in just 2 or 3 years ago. And here, this is an area in New Orleans, Louisiana. And what you can see is some of that current product line and deep learning AI developed products on the right-hand side of your screen compared to a product that we produced about 3 or 4 years ago on the left-hand side. That was that more object-based machine learning output. Similarly, here's another natural color image. This is in Charleston County here in South Carolina, where both Norm and I are sitting. And this is what some of the canopy mapping that we're producing looks like. And I should note that we've been having a lot of conversations with folks like the U.S. Forest Service and their urban and community forestry program. You might have seen their Trees at Work site that was just released recently with some of the canopy mapping that they've done in partnership with a company called Earth Define for urban areas in the U.S., as well as folks like the American Forests, who have a tree equity score tool and have been utilizing some of this type of data in that analysis. Similarly, here's some of the specs associated with that product, as well as our distinction between trees and shrubs based on height. And here's one last shot of some of those water products, again, in Charleston County here in South Carolina. And I should note that, this product in particular was kind of an interesting one for this area. It really highlighted a nice advantage and complement that these data sets can provide to existing data sets, like those you might see in the National Wetland Inventory or the National Hydrography data. This more up-to-date product actually picked up a lot of the ponds that you can see in this image that were not present at the time of the NWI or NHD mapping. And here's the areas where we've developed those products. Pretty significant amount of real estate. We talk about the fact that CCAP is a coastal land cover. So as you can see, when we talk about a land cover for the nation, we're really talking mostly about coastal areas. Though I should note that that does include some full coastal states like Washington, Wisconsin, South Carolina, and Louisiana. As well as the entire state of Alaska, which is kind of a first foray for us. This includes over 1.5 million square miles of data, or over something like 3 trillion pixels. And it's been kind of a little bit of a change for us because we're working with private companies and because they have some proprietary AI and intellectual property rights that they want to protect. We've had to work through some negotiation of protecting those property rights. And so you will see a use restriction associated with much of our data, at least in the near term, for the next couple of years, where that data can be used for almost any purpose. The only real excluded purpose is for utilizing those data sets as a training source for AI for the express purpose of creating similar type products. And this is just to protect our company partners' rights in this space, and so that some other firm doesn't come along, download all of our data, use that to train their own AI, and then start out competing those folks in the marketplace. Now, as great as we hope you will find that impervious canopy and water data, that's not our end goal. That's just our first step along the way. NOAA really hopes to build nationally out a data set that includes the approximate 20 categories that we've tended to always map as part of our coastal change analysis program work. And we hope that we can do that over the next year or two so that we can start updating those products in the future, like I mentioned early on. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what's included in those products. If you're not familiar with CCAP, this is the classification scheme that we include as part of that full scheme land cover data set. The couple of categories that you see in bold here are the ones that come fairly directly from those initial set of impervious canopy and water data sets. And all of the other categories that you see listed here are ones that we work to add in on top of those products once they're complete. So I mentioned early on that AI is not a magic button, not a magic bullet. I mentioned a couple of times that we do a lot of work to add value over and on top of those initial data sets that we've started to produce. And so what I'm going to do now is just take a few slides and talk a little bit about what that workflow looks like and what some of those improvements that we make are. And so I'm going to break what I'm calling our phase 2 product workflow, that's the development of that full CCAP scheme product, down into a couple of stages. The first stage, which I've got listed here, includes essentially refinements to those automated AI outputs. We look to utilize ancillary data like OpenStreetMaps, state impervious building and roads data to help us identify features that might have been missed in the mapping that Ecopia did for us. Typically, those products or those areas are missed due to the fact that most of the mapping that we were doing as part of that data development was leaf-on imagery, because we make a lot of use of the USDA's NAEP program and the image data sets that come out of that. Those products are collected during peak growing season. And so as you can imagine, a lot of the impervious cover that might exist in the area, it's difficult to see when the foliage is out on those trees. And so we model some of those potentially missed areas in, and then do a fairly manual review and interpretation to make sure that we're not double capturing features where those products don't align, and to make sure that the things that we are adding in actually exist on the ground and are accurate. In a similar way, we do a little bit of water refinement. Typically, this is focused on removing a lot of the intertidal features, things like unconsolidated sediments, sands, and muds that may have been picked up as part of the water category, depending on how they looked in the imagery and the tidal stage of that imagery, as well as separating out some of the floating aquatic vegetation that might also be present within those areas. And again, that's a little bit of a modeling and then manual review and editing exercise. And then finally, we will make some canopy refinements. And what we do here is make use of any available LiDAR data that's close enough in vintage that we feel like we can utilize it, and work to kind of tweak some of the detailed distinctions based on height to help tweak some of the features that we get captured as trees versus shrubs versus maybe lower lying vegetation or bare ground. This also helps us introduce some level of detail in urban areas where those initial automated AI-derived products might not have picked up those data sets or those vegetation features initially. So just going to give you a little bit of an idea about what some of those products look like. This screenshot here shows some of those features in terms of the impervious cover that we model in. You can see those highlighted in red and orange on the left-hand portion of your slide. And you can see that compared to all of the features that were picked up in that automated mapping in white in that same slide. On the right-hand side, you can see the imagery that we did that mapping from. And you can probably imagine or clearly see why some of those features, like the long driveways that were pretty covered by tree canopy, weren't picked up, and some of the features that were under those canopy areas were left off. Similarly, we've got some water and the imagery beside it here in this slide. Areas in red are some of the features that aren't actually water, that we would want to make sure that we were flagging and potentially either removing or adding as appropriate. You can see in this instance, we've got some shoreline beaches that are getting picked up, potentially due to the tidal stage of the imagery, as well as some of that aquatic vegetation. And just to give you kind of an idea about what some of the input and output products look like, I want to focus this example here just on the left-hand side, far left, you've got kind of that starting water-only classification. And on the far right, you've got water in the darker blue and what we call unconsolidated shore in that cyan color. And just kind of shows how we make some of those additions, both removing those unconsolidated features from water and adding them in where they weren't part of the water category to begin with. Finally, one or two last examples here where we talk about some of the canopy mapping. This is a good example where some of the taller field crops actually caused a little bit of confusion in terms of what we were mapping as a shrub category. These are not woody features though, and we worked to remove those from that shrub classification. You'll see later on, these would be features that we'd pick up in more of a cultivated class for the CCAP product line. And as maybe you can imagine, if you're familiar with marshes, they tend to be very rough, bushy areas. They're not woody vegetation, but they tend to look a lot like shrub. And so there are places where that can cause a lot of trouble when we go to some effort to utilize both the LiDAR data as well as some other texture and other related measures to remove those from that category. Moving along, once we kind of solidify that initial set of categories and the refinements to those initial products, we work to incorporate some of our land use related elements. This includes both a category that we call open space developed, which tends to be lawns, golf courses, and managed grasses around features like airports and cemeteries, things that are really derived more from the context involved than the vegetation itself, as well as some of our agricultural categories. And this is where we'd go in and break out both cultivated row crops, as well as pasture and hay features as one combined category. And again, these are data sets where we make use of both some automated AI classifiers to help improve the classification that we do, but also ancillary data and contextual measures and logic to help us really flag features that should potentially be included in these categories. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this, but you can see one example here. Open space developed is kind of the mustard yellow color in and around the developed features in white that you can see here. Cultivated row crops, those are in the dark brown color, and our pasture hay features are kind of in the tannish color. And I'll just go back and forth a couple of times here between the imagery and that derived mapping product. And you can see the level of detail that we're incorporating in these data sets. And finally, the last phase of our stage of this phase of work is focused in on taking the categories that we've mapped either as herbaceous, shrub, and forested features, and looking to ancillary data such as the NWI, the National Wetlands Inventory, and some of the Surgo soils data to help us start a modeling process and refining process to make wetland distinctions for what had been those structural calls without a wetland or explicit upland element. And really what we do here is go through that same process of kind of modeling in based on kind of that expert rule set that we've developed, manually reviewing those outputs and either tweaking the rule set and moving through that a second phase or a second time, and then going to do any kind of manual editing that may be required. Now, I've talked a little bit about what it is that we do to produce those data sets. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're producing those products. So previously we talked a little bit about the impervious, the canopy, the water data set that we have from some pretty large sections of the coastal US. Now I'm going to focus in on where we're actively working to build out those products. We've got 2 data sets that are available for download as part of our new high resolution product line right now. That includes a 5.5 county area around Tampa in Florida, as well as an 11 county area around Houston and Galveston in Texas. Currently, you can also see a lighter shade of green here that is covered within the Mid-Atlantic and Vermont. Those are places where we coordinate with both the Chesapeake Bay program and the Chesapeake Conservancy, as well as the state of Vermont, who both produce their own high resolution product line. We're not reinventing the wheel there. Eventually, we'll work those products into our own data holdings. The other areas that you see highlighted in blue are places where we're currently active or getting ready to gear up on the mapping that we're doing. The next state to be released is going to be the state of Maine. That, along with Hawaii, the Pacific territories, and the Caribbean territories, will all be products that are out in January or February of 2025. Every other area you see listed here in terms of a few locations in Florida, the coastal portions of Mississippi, Alabama, the coastal area of Louisiana, a large portion, if not all, of the Puget Sound, all of North Carolina and South Carolina, as well as the large area that you see highlighted in the Great Lakes. Those are all products that we're going to be working on over the next 12 to 18 months. We do not currently have the schedule set for which of those geographies will be released when, but we should have that pretty well in hand come the beginning of 2025, and we'll be putting a status map up on our website so that folks can reference that. In addition to this, you've got all the areas in that lighter gray color. Those are the areas where we have the impervious canopy and water data set and could develop those this more complete scheme of CCAP product. We really hope to do that, as I've mentioned a couple of times over the next couple of years. But I'll also note that we're reaching out to folks who might be interested in helping us make that happen sooner. And what we're able to offer is kind of a cost-sharing partnership. where folks who might be interested in the development of those data sets can help us fund the development of those products, and we can help oversee that development to make sure that they live up to the specs that we have come to establish as part of our CCAP product line. And here is just an addition to that slide where you can see a few of the groups where we've done just that type of partnership operation in the past and worked with folks to put those partnerships in place and to try to work to expand the mapping that we're doing in a way that will both meet NOAA's needs as well as fulfill the goals of those state and regional partners. Now, I'm going to transition to a couple of other topics here before I close up for the day. The first is I just want to highlight, if you're not familiar with land cover data in general, or some of the higher resolution products like those that we're developing and how they can be used, I just want to point out this URL. This is a website within the NOAA Office for Coastal Management website where we've started to collect some of those example applications. And I think what you'll see as you look at this list and peruse through that page is that there's a wealth of applications where this data can be used, and a wealth of applications where it can be used to much greater impact than the data sets that have been produced at that 30-meter resolution in the past. And that runs the gamut from improved flood modeling and risk assessment, like I stressed earlier, to improved stormwater management and water quality modeling, to the heat risk, urban forestry, and tree equity topic that I mentioned earlier. And this example here is one that Norm's pretty familiar with, and some of the work that was done by the city of Charleston to go in and look at both the impervious cover and high heat areas within the city, as well as where tree canopy existed and where there were opportunities to plant trees. They then looked at low-income areas that were at those high risks, had a large amount of tree planting, and targeted those communities for tree planting to help mitigate those risks, which is just a great example of some of the applications that this type of data really can have, and that 30-meter data wouldn't have been able to support in the past. I'm not going to go into too much more detail, but there's a lot of information in these more detailed data sets, and they can really go a long way to addressing the need that 30-meter products have not been able to in the past. And then finally, I mentioned a minute ago some of the opportunities that NOAA presents for partnering and buying up some of the data. And so we've worked with folks to both increase the area of coverage beyond what NOAA would typically map in the coastal portion of the country. The state of Washington is a great example. They funded the development of those same impervious canopy and water data sets for the eastern portion of Washington and really took advantage of the work that NOAA had done in the western portion. Also includes development of that CCAP scheme product sooner or faster than might be possible if you were just to wait for NOAA funding to make that happen. If you're interested in that, we're certainly more than interested in talking to you. And it also includes data development options for more detailed mapping, things that might go beyond the typical scheme of CCAP. Two great examples of that includes the one that you see here, where impervious features have been delineated out expressly, categorizing building footprints, road vectors, driveways, sidewalks, and a lot of other features that some of our contractors can map, as well as more detailed mapping of natural features. And this is another great example where we worked with both the states of Rhode Island and New Hampshire to take the estuarine emergent category or salt marsh category that CCAP maps and break that down into about a dozen different explicit features, things like pans and pools, as well as explicit species mapping. And this has been really informative to those states for them to help assess the impacts of climate change over the last several years, and it will be even more important as they move forward into the future. And New Hampshire actually utilized this data and a lot of analysis to really be the keystone of their comprehensive marsh management plan for the state. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking at you and open up the floor for questions if folks have them, and leave you with a couple of links that I'm hoping you'll peruse and dig into our data a little bit more.
Please feel free to put questions into the Q&A box, and we will move them forward directly to Nate. We will be providing, in the chat, we've placed both of the URLs that are visible on this slide. And if, just so people realize, if they didn't see it in the chat, we will be providing a version of this that people can use on their own afterwards. Just to kick things off, Nate, could you tell us a little bit more about the software that's currently being used to create these land classification coverages?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we work with private companies. They often utilize their own proprietary software, so I won't speak too much to that other than to acknowledge the fact that that does occur. In the work that we do, we utilize a lot of Python codes. We utilize a lot of different software packages for different aspects of the work that we do. In the past, we've been a big ERDAS Imagine shop, but we've really expanded out over the last number of years the work that we do to take advantage of QGIS and the open source software that it provides, as well as eCognition and the image object segmentation that software provides. We don't use that necessarily as a basis for everything that we map, but we do find it to be very useful for tying some of the ancillary data that we collect, things like the NWI and the Sergos data, explicitly to the imagery that we're using to do that mapping, and not having to deal with some of the differences and boundaries that exist in those types of products that might have been developed with more manual photo interpretation methods in the past. I guess the thing I can say, and if it didn't come across in the presentation, we break our workflow up into a lot of smaller decisions, right? This isn't one process where we try to categorize everything all at once. We break it down into simpler decisions, and we utilize a set of both software and process workflow that we find or have worked through to find that it'll perform best for those categories. And so that allows us to be a little bit more targeted in our solution.
Thank you. I wanted to mention, we're very lucky in that Nate's office is not far away from the university that I'm at here at Charleston, at the College of Charleston. And we've been able to work with these products a number of different ways to really look at how they can best be used and modified or augmented with the data that's around. One of the nicest things about these data sets is that accuracy of the impervious coverage that's already available, as well as the tree canopy. As the project that Nate showed with the city looking at tree canopy areas, there is a correlation between public health and air quality and the total tree canopy cover. And it's been a very useful tool for the city of Charleston as they've been working on equity. We have a question in the Q&A. Are you able to define the mean high water level or mean low water within the data from the water scans that you're using?
So not from the imagery, and that's actually tends to be one of our biggest challenges, right? I mentioned that we utilize a lot of the USDA's National Agricultural Imagery Program, or NAPE data. That is a data set that the USDA flies to assess agricultural areas. So it's flown both at peak greenness, but also regardless of what the tidal condition might be for the area. Sometimes we get very lucky and they acquire that imagery at a lower tide, which is what we would prefer. Sometimes we get unlucky and they acquire that imagery at higher tides, which makes mapping of those intertidal sediments and some of the marsh features difficult. When that happens, we utilize an ancillary data set or an alternative image source. So I guess the short answer would have been no, but we do utilize LiDAR data to help us derive some of those mean lower tidal datums or the mean high water or the mean tide datum to help us to try to improve the mapping that we do from those data sets into those categories. I will say that states that collect low or very low tide imagery for the purposes of, say, seagrass mapping, that's worth its weight in gold to us for those exact purposes. Similarly, NOAA's National Geodetic Survey often collects shoreline imagery. They often do that at low tide, but they don't cover very much of the country in any one given year. So as useful as that is, it can be typically a little dated in terms of the mapping that we do. Yeah, and maybe I'll just keep chatting while folks are thinking and maybe typing any other questions that they might have, and add on to the point that Norm made about accuracy. You know, one of the challenges that I in particular have had, and I don't know if anyone else on the call has seen similar, is that the advent of these more advanced AI tools becoming so available and easy to use is that it's become very easy to produce a very poor quality land cover data set, same as it has to produce a higher quality one. And so I guess the one other point that I could make to folks is, as kind of a takeaway, if you get nothing else, is that accuracy assessment is not going to be the be all and end all of some of that. Most of those products are going to be assessed in the mid to upper 80s at a minimum. And that does not necessarily mean that all of the features that are mapped within it are probably going to be fit for your use. So, I would just say a little bit of a buyer beware out there, right? What I often tell folks is there's an old saying, fast, cheap, and good, pick two. So we're trying to make sure that we're producing a good product without it taking either too long or be too expensive to produce.
And that is a very true, having worked through these workflows with Nate's group and looking at the iterations that can be necessary to create data sets with this kind of accuracy. It's a truly amazing and wonderful data set. We have another question in the Q&A. So is there the potential to introduce bathymetric mapping to help create better definition of water features, or is that too far-fetched to ask?
No, it certainly is. It certainly is, or would be useful if it exists. Similar to the discussion we just had on the imagery, any LiDAR data that we have that includes that bathymetric component, or it would be acquired at a lower tidal stage, is worth a lot to us because it helps us in making those differences. Though I will say, for the purposes of CCAP, we do not map anything below a mean low or low water. Right, so we map those intertidal sediments, and we map marsh features, but we do not map anything like seagrasses or benthic data sets. That typically requires a much more focused data collection. We do have others within our office that do that type of mapping, and it's a great complement to ours, but it's not something that we include explicitly as part of our CCAP work.
Great. I can't speak highly enough about these data sets for the work we've been doing across the state of South Carolina. Looking forward to the full 1 meter data set release. We've been very lucky that Charleston is a test area. We get to see the products as they develop. And this truly is a resource that I think all of us will be very lucky to have access to.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. I hope others feel the same, and that as the products come out, you'll access them. And if you do have any feedback or see anything good and that you make use of, or anything that you feel like could be better, we are always looking for that type of feedback. Um, Not to say that we will necessarily go and edit the products to meet your need immediately, or that it might not meet the CCAP spec, but we certainly do take that into consideration, if not immediately, as we start to go through our update cycles in the future. So please, as you work with any of these products, either the ones that we've already released or the ones that we will have coming towards you in some geographies later in 25 or early 26, please let us know what you think of them.
Wonderful. Again, I would like to thank Nate for his presentation and remind people that the GPN has multiple ERISA webinars that are planned, as well as projects from earlier in today's presentation. So please stay tuned for more. And again, once again, Nate, I can't thank you enough for this presentation.
Thanks for having me.